our global read. We're so excited to have you with us today. Thanks for being here. Today, we're very fortunate to have on with us Anton Troyer, who is going to talk about his book, The Language Warriors Manifesto, How to Keep Languages Alive No Matter the Odds. I want to thank everyone for your generous donations, which makes it possible for us to offer you this global read and global reads into the future. Thank you so much. Our next global read is with Colin McCann. His book, A Paragon, will be featured on August 25th. I hope you can join us for that. And currently, we're offering a course through the Charter CEI Education Institute, and it started on Monday, but it is not too late to start. We're just a couple days into it, self-paced. So please join us if you're interested. And then in August, we'll be bringing you a course called Becoming Whole Together. This is a Gender Equity and Reconciliation International course, 7-week online course. Please visit our website to learn more. Just shortly, I'm going to introduce our host for today, Ron Corn Jr. But before I do that, I just want to take care of some housekeeping details. Please use the chat room if you have any questions for our author or our guest host. And I'll be checking the chat room, and we'll be bringing those questions in at the end of the program. In the meantime, Ron and Anton are going to have an amazing conversation around his book. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Ron. Ron Corn Jr. is a member of the Menominee Nation, a nation with a history in what is now called Wisconsin that goes back farther than any other modern group of people. Ron takes pride in being called a language warrior, and over the course of his life, he has fought to maintain, preserve, and now revitalize the unique dialect of Algonquin language. As groups continue to grow, it only matters if traditional culture and heritage teachings are honored, and it has been Ron's great struggle to innovate and develop these skills to pass on to other members of the proud nation of the Menominee people. Ron was invited to speak at the TEDx in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Be sure to watch his talk, Native American Culture, Language, the Key to Everything. Thanks, Ron, for being here. And then I'll introduce Anton. And then I know you're going to do that in a more informal space. But thanks again so much for being here with us today. So I will introduce now our amazing author. Dr. Anton Troyer is Executive Director of the American Indian Resource Center at Bemidji State University. He has a BA from Princeton University, MAs and PhD from the University of Minnesota. He is editor, oh boy, I'm going to see if I can say this, of the Oshkanabewis, pretty good, Native Journal, the only academic journal of the Ojibwe language, and author of 9 books. Dr. Troyer has sat on many organizational boards, including the White Earth Land Recovery Project, Sanford Merit Care Health System, and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Dr. Troyer has received more than 40 prestigious awards and fellowships from many organizations, including the American Philosophical Society, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Bush Foundation, and the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. Anton, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your words with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to both you and Ron to carry on the conversation. Thank you so much.
Nahaw nature matnam in Newok, Natanawe Markana, Wishik Mawani Wilk, a Hiosa Itua, Wawanan Kitana anymore, Yos Gispis Mawa Chaseniak, supposed to watch Kakikitea. So I want to, first of all, thank everybody for joining us today. All our relatives, wherever you're from and wherever you're tuning in at. I'm particularly excited to get into this interview, but I also wanted to give Dr. Anton Troyer, the opportunity to introduce himself the way that he knows how, so that we can find out who he really is. So Niji, at this time, if you could enlighten us with a Shanab introduction, that would be great. Waiwanan.
Aha, Waiwanan Miigwech, Nin Wago Shindigu, Minawa Migizi and Dodem, Kazagasquaji Meka Gandunjaba, Hapaji, Nimin Wendam Bimi Ayano Manongum, Gaganona Dian, Ganodamang yo. Onosa getting waving and not an AP taint among Minawa Gaja Chigang the Bimi with doing Giniga Niminang, She Miigwech.
Aha, Waiwanan Wagush. So, you know, I'm not sure exactly who our audience is, but according to the introduction, you all can understand that I'm pretty enthusiastic about this title, about the author, and about the content. This is something that I take of personal interest and pride in my own journey here. And so I've got a ton of questions. And if you're anything like me, when you picked up this book, a lot of things will speak directly to you that you're reading and stuff like that. So I wanted to get this ball rolling today by asking Anton, you know, I know this last year has been particularly interesting in everybody's lives, and maybe you want to take a second to let us know how you and yours are doing, and how you manage that, and how you're looking to the near future here.
Yeah, Miigwech. Big tests this past year. I'm doing fine. My immediate nuclear family have all weathered COVID pretty well. But it's been pretty devastating in Native communities. By our estimates, probably about 20% of our fluent speaking Ojibwe people passed away from COVID. Most of those elders, and it's been pretty heartrending. You know, just thinking, for example, we did a lot of work this year in Mille Lacs. Over the past couple of years in Mille Lacs, we're actually really excited that we're able to start developing Rosetta Stone for Ojibwe. And we've been developing a series of books for young readers in Ojibwe. They identified only 25 fluent speakers in Mille Lacs. And I mean, it's been incredible what we've been able to produce. Our first year of Rosetta Stone will be releasing this fall. We've got more coming out. We'll actually be releasing another year of the program every year for the next 6 years. And we got 5 young reader books coming out. And of the 25 fluent speakers we started working with in Mille Lacs, you know, half a dozen passed away this past year, you know, with COVID. So, you know, that's kind of like our Jedi Council in that particular community. Ojibwe is a little different than Menominee. For those of you who don't know, you know, Menominee, all of the Menominee people and speakers, you know, come from one place. Ojibwe is a bigger group that has a bigger geographical spread. So it kind of depends on what part of Ojibwe country you're looking at. You know, there are 141 Ojibwe First Nations in Canada, and some of those actually have 100% fluency in the language. But in the United States, almost all of our speakers are elders, our first speakers, although there's a growing group of second language learners. And it's actually where some of the most productive work with language revitalization, you know, Ojibwe medium schools and stuff is happening. So we're in a little different dynamics that way. But certainly it's been, you know, a year filled with personal losses. And, you know, I knew all of the speakers that passed away in our area and worked with them closely. At the same time, you know, it's shown, the tests have provided some opportunity to adapt. Like we taught all of our elders how to use Zoom, and some of it's been kind of fun. Like my daughter's, you know, on our transcription team, she's a good speaker, and you know, she was working with one of the elders in Mille Lacs, and she got a hold of her, and the elder was saying, "Oh, Gijagukwe, yeah, I was just gonna go to the casino. My niece was here, but this is more important. That's right. Let's do this." And so they did like a 2-hour Zoom session, you know, developing Ojibwe stories. And then she said, "Well, I'll probably go to the casino now. My niece has been waiting in the car the whole time." and just totally forgot about her niece in the car. So some of that has been kind of, fun and interesting to see how we've been able to adapt in those, with different technology. But there have been big tests too.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks for that. And one of the main things that I was interested in is, obviously you're a person with multiple talents and could have wrote a book on a lot of different topics. And I was wondering what particularly is going through your mind or your heart when you sit down and you say, this is the time to write this title, and you put your time and energy into producing this work. Let me know a little bit about the headspace that you were in that process.
Oh man, there are a lot of things going on in my mind about the importance of language revitalization. And maybe I'll just start at the 20,000 foot view and then get to the more personal stuff. But, right now there are almost 7,000 languages spoken in the world, but, 2,500 or so are going to be extinct over the next 20 years. Only about 100 of those 7,000 languages are actively and widely taught at colleges and universities. And I think most people are aware that we're at a bottleneck time with the extinction of many plant and animal species, but we're also at a bottleneck with bodies of human knowledge and ways of knowing. And, I think if you just look at the broad spans of human history, 10,000 years ago, only 10,000 years ago, all of us were had village-based worldviews and earth-centered, perspectives about how to deal with everything in life. We were communal. We worked together a little more cooperatively in terms of harvesting food and sharing all of our food cache collectively. And one of the attributes of colonization has been, a pretty systemic dismantling and assault on those earth-based worldviews and communal kind of fabric for society. And, white folk were really hard on each other as they perfected colonization and took it to the rest of the world. But we're all deeply impacted by this stuff now. And we can see, in terms of environmental pressure and pressure on human societies, just how devastating that can be. One of the attributes of colonization too is taking one language and culture and religion and using it to supplant all others. And it's at the heart of our current racial climate, because if colonization is about erasure, then one of the greatest fears of those who are steeped in that culture will be fear of their own erasure, which is driving resistance to building bridges and overcoming what's going on with race in a place like America right now, or politics, or so many things. And we all need healing. But why would we think, colonization creates so many problems, right? The use of violence and things like that. Why would we think all the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems could be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? And they can't. And so within indigenous communities and within different languages, you have different worldviews and ways of solving problems. And I think we have something to teach the rest of the world. But this is a make or break time for most indigenous languages around the world. And if we decide to wait 50 years and then, devote some resources or time or attention to this, most of those worldviews that are embedded in those languages will be gone. And it's very difficult to resurrect a language from the grave. There have been a few attempts. Even really what has happened with Hebrew is something quite unique and anomalous. And a Hebrew speaker from 2,000 years ago would probably not understand somebody speaking Hebrew in Israel today. So there's something lost with a resurrection plan. And those are only possible when you have vast resources, in terms of humans, money, and just linguistic resources to even attempt something like that. And that is happening with some indigenous languages now. But for many, we've still got 150 or so indigenous languages spoken in the US and Canada, and only 20 of those are spoken by kids. So we got to get cracking if we want to make something happen, and something can happen. I have a lot of hope for the effort.
Wow, ne kat tanana ne at Kamanuchi mem, you got good words around that. So one of the things, as soon as you open the book and as you read through the entire thing, it points back to a lot of the comments you just made. Language warriors, as we call them, encounter a ton of adversity. I think you start talking about an experience in grade school that obviously had some profound impact on your journey, because you're writing about it here all these years later. But then throughout the entire book, we talk about the nature of water that's always trying to flow, just like we are trying to find the easiest spaces to exist in. But every once in a while, there's a change maker. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate on some of these defining moments in your journey that kind of brought you to where you are today.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. You know, for those of you I haven't had a chance to dig into to the book yet, I've kind of got it into sections. So one is what Ron's asking about now, which is what's your personal story. And so there's, you know, this was probably my most personal book so far, just talking about my own journey and struggles, you know, around our language and culture. And then there's a section about, you know, why the language is important, what's in the way. There's another one about my journey, how I did it, and then how we did it as a group, with ongoing efforts to preserve and revitalize language. And, you know, with my own story, I think I'm an unlikely candidate to know much or have much to share about something like the revitalization of an indigenous language. My father is not native at all. He was actually an Austrian Jewish Holocaust survivor, spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. And I'll just show you some pictures, because sometimes they speak more words. Let me see here. I'll put this up in like this, so you can all see some pictures of him. So there's my dad. And, you know, there's a lot to his journey too, but the short version of the story is, you know, at age 13, made his way to the United States. Eventually, he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. My mother grew up in a little village called Bena in the heart of the Leech Lake Reservation, and experienced pretty visceral poverty. I think for her, harvesting wild rice was less a cool cultural pastime and more a necessary means of survival. She also ended up becoming the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And I got to see some pretty big changes, you know, in the lives of my parents. But English was the language that my parents spoke primarily at home. And although my mother made a point of hauling me to ceremonies and making sure I had exposure to that, it wasn't until, you know, I was an adult that I really came to appreciate, value, and kind of pick up my language and cultural toolbox and apply it, you know, more seriously. And now it's kind of centered in, you know, in my whole life. So I came to that. There was, I guess I could show you too, another picture, one of my great mentors here. And I'll just skip through a couple of these. Well, there he is. So there's Niba Gijik, or Archie Mose. And for me, when I'd finished college, I kind of probably traumatized my parents a little bit by saying, I'm not taking a job, I'm not going to grad school, and I am coming home. My plan is to walk the earth, and I'm going to go find, you know, this guy. And they said, well, good luck with that, because with your college degree, you feed yourself now. And so I did. I went and found Archie Mose, who was kind of a famous spiritual leader. He was born in 1901. He was a teenager the first time he saw a white man. He was in his 30s the first time he saw a black man or a car. And he was, his namesakes were veterans of the US Civil War. All of his kids are born in wigwams. And even, his kids, of course, grew up speaking the language too. And when I went to see him, he was sitting in a small modern house and watching WWF SmackDown on TV, laughing very loudly. And yeah, and so I remember coming in there, and it was not what I was expecting. I thought I'd be sitting in a wigwam smoking a pipe or something. I don't know. And so he stopped, looked at me, and then he shut off the TV and he said, "I've been waiting for you." And I remember thinking, how could you be waiting for me? You don't even know who I am. And he'd had a dream about somebody, and I must have looked like, at that time, the kid in his dream. And he just kind of opened the door for me. So I ended up spending a lot of time with him. I was his chauffeur and gopher, hauling him around to ceremonies and things like that. And I just kind of stumbled into a life-altering journey where I ended up, he could speak English, kind of, sort of, but he pretty much preferred to operate in Ojibwe. Wasn't literate. I took him to the bank because he had a little check. He used to drive truck for the county highway department. So he had a little pension check. And I took him there to cash his check, and he couldn't endorse his check. They still knew who he was and gave him his cash or whatever. Hadn't finished second grade, but I consider him one of the best educated people I'd ever met. And after that, I kind of felt like Forrest Gump. Once I figured it out, every time I went somewhere, I was running, and I never thought it was going to take me anywhere, but it did. Today, I'm kind of a servant, slave to our people. I officiate at funerals and ceremonies, kind of intimidating, doing the work that someone like Archie used to do, but we are never the ones who came before us. We never replace them. We only succeed them. And it's our calling, to keep these things going. I applied myself in many other ways too. I, studied our language. Today I get to do a lot of work, even on the academic side of language. I teach our language at Bemidji State University, which is a small regional university in northern Minnesota, kind of in the heart of Ojibwe country. And I get to wear many hats. So I kind of feel like I got one foot in a wigwam and one foot in an ivory tower. I'm sitting in the ivory tower room today. There's the room. I was literally just yesterday sitting in a wigwam and, singing songs and, doing ceremony stuff. And to me, we are ancient and we are modern all at the same time. We don't have to look like we stepped off the set from Dances with Wolves to be authentically indigenous. And at the same time, it's a fair question to ask, how much can a people change and still be the same people? And so I think it's important that we keep our languages and our cultures alive, that they sustain and nourish us and connect us to one another, and have so much to offer. And, Ronco was alluding to this analogy that I use, that humans were kind of like water rushing down the mountain. We follow the gorges and paths of least resistance. We tend to do, or at least deeply shaped by, what our parents and grandparents have done. But sometimes, someone stands in the middle of the raging torrent and tries to direct the flow to another channel. And while human beings will always be changing, our cultures are always changing, our languages are always changing, that at the same time, we can try to shape the change. And that's what language warriors do. We say this matters. And we try to shape our flow of ever-changing human culture and language in a way that preserves the most important and integral parts. So by that, it's a tension, cultural change and cultural continuity. To me, for example, some of the change that I orchestrate is we are developing literary traditions for what used to be an oral language. We're not going to go Amish and wall ourselves off from the rest of the world and, try to freeze our culture and language in time. So we have to get the computer the Xbox and the TV speaking in our languages. That's culture and language change. At the same time, saying these languages will be the medium of instruction and the center of our worldview, as opposed to one of the colonial languages, that's a big, preservation and revitalization effort. And so it's a bit ironic, a paradox, but that's kind of part of the work.
Wow, that was a loaded response there.
Throw it all at you, Niji.
Yeah, so let me kind of maybe step into some of that. Hopefully there are some young language warriors, some new language warriors, and some seasoned language warriors that are listening or potentially will listen. Some of the advice that comes across in the book, I wrote things down like the crabs in a bucket, and so there's like you spoke about this a little bit. This, how much can we change without changing per se, and these kind of things. Do you have advice for new and seasoned language warriors that are encountering these sorts of challenges in their own respective communities?
Yeah, it can be pretty heartrending sometimes. We bump into different kinds of resistance. And, among the hats I wear, I do a lot of racial equity work, and there's kind of a grandfather text for a lot of the work out there by Paulo Freire called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it's one of those books where I kind of felt like I needed a thesaurus and a bottle of aspirin to get through it. But at the same time, he's a mad genius who really shared, I think, a pretty beautiful and helpful frame for dealing with any kind of oppression or ism. And he would say that there are kind of 4 pillars that prop up any kind of oppression dynamic. And only one of them is actually an outside actor trying to keep someone down. So if you're talking about race, only one is like, the white supremacist or something like that. The others are happening inside of the oppressed community. And they show up as like lateral internalized oppression when we're mean and hard on each other. I'm stupid. I can't do it. I'll never be able to learn my language. We're never going to get anywhere. It's lateral oppression. Like, those people are stupid. They're evil. They're corrupt. It's not worth our time. And we fight each other, and it's intra-oppressed group oppression. Like, why are they giving the Ho-Chunk money? They should be giving it to us. We need it more, or something like that. All of which serves to prop up and keep our oppressed state in place. And so it's unfortunate that, but also kind of empowering to know that a lot of the work is actually within our realm of control, meaning that we can work on not being so hard on ourselves, practicing, identifying self-love and healing. We can practice that with each other. And sometimes that means we need to check ourselves a little bit. Like, I'm from a big family. We love to tease hard. And sometimes I have to say, wonder, like, at what point is that just good fun? And when am I putting someone in their place? When I'm actually hurting somebody, And then, when we're doing that, in an intra-oppressed way. Also within that book, he also shares a pedagogy for liberation that, like, there's never been a case of the oppressor just liberating the oppressed. Those who have been dealing with any kind of ism, whatever it is, race, gender, language, community, tribal, whatever, that we actually have to, and the only way to get to a more liberated, healthy state is to engineer that ourselves. Like, in terms of language, Uncle Sam's not going to come walking out of the bush with our languages on a silver platter and say, here you go, sorry about the past 500 years. Right? They don't know the language, don't value the language. We have to make our own luck. We have to generate our own impetus. And also, part of the anatomy of colonization and oppression is that as a Native person, for example, I do better in this modern colonial white dominated world. I do better the more white that I act, the better I master and front my academic English skills, the more that and by the way, I'm really good at whiteness. My office looks like that, right? And so the more I do that, the more I'm financially rewarded and the less crap I get. And the less likely I am to be racially profiled or whatever, right? And so because of that, I have to have the self-awareness of that. And also all the structures are built around that. So for example, over 100 treaties have education clauses, that say as partial payment for the land sold, the US government promises to provide for the health and education of indigenous people in perpetuity. As a result, the US federal government, not as a special right to a special interest group, but as partial payment for land sold, provides an Indian health service and a Bureau of Indian Education. And sometimes I feel like, man, the Bureau of Indian Education never made better yes men for the white men. Like we can put a brown face on assimilation. It's assimilation all the same because we're doing this, rather than our own language and culture, even though it should be in our purview to do those things. And so we have to have that awareness to then not just take control of our environments, some manifest sovereignty, but to think about the priorities that really matter. And to me, those things would be, language and culture as pathways to our health and well-being and things like that. And so, unfortunately, we're going to run into a lot of adversity because those systems and structures inherently resist change, especially the kind of change that involves power sharing or the surrender of power, to some disenfranchised minority group with whatever's on their agenda. And because of that, we will run into adversity. And so as long as we expect that and are prepared for that, we can develop tools to navigate the adversity and make good things happen.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Niji. I appreciate that, man. That's good stuff. And interestingly enough, some of the last remarks in your response there, you do talk in some degree and fashion about sort of a language revitalization pioneer, so to speak. Daryl Kipp is name dropped more than once, and I believe you do also make mention about efforts happening in New Zealand and Hawaii that kind of give face to what we're working towards. If you wouldn't mind maybe sharing a little bit with us about your experiences and knowledge about those programs and maybe how they had an impact on your journey here.
Yeah, anybody who's not worried about this stuff just isn't paying attention. Even folks like, the Maori or the Hawaiians still feel stress about this. But for those who don't know, and I'm noticing from the chat too, we've got folks, from Connecticut who are doing work with, Pequot, and there's maybe, I thought I saw a Ho-Chunk person on there and some others, even some people doing work with African languages. And so for those who aren't aware, I would say the Maori are probably the pioneers in indigenous language revitalization. They have a little bit different political situation because the main treaty that kind of governs land issues in all of New Zealand has strong supports for the sovereignty of the Maori and their language and culture. But the Native Hawaiians are really an interesting case. They're not even recognized, with sovereignty the way that, other American Indian groups are. But 30 years ago, their language was illegal for use in public schools. There were only 1,000 speakers left of Hawaiian. Half lived in one isolated island community, Niihau, and the others were all elders. So it wasn't looking too good. Today, there are 24,000 speakers of Hawaiian, and 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home as children. So they tripled the population of first speakers, and they multiplied 24-fold their population of speakers total. It's also one of the official languages for the whole state of Hawaii. And there are about, I think, 22 Hawaiian medium schools. So you can actually go to school through your entire K-12 experience and college, and all of your instruction will be delivered in Hawaiian. So they really grew, and it started with a very small group of dozen people trying to get that together. And it was not easy then, and it's not easy now, but incredible success. So I would say that the languages where I've traveled all over, and in the US, where I've seen some emerging strength at scale, where they're like immersion schools and programs that are really starting to take off. Mohawk is one, Blackfeet is another, Cherokee, Navajo's finally getting in the game, Ojibwe, and those ones are kind of getting things going a little bit more at scale. And then emerging efforts with other language communities. Even, it's kind of interesting, but like Havasupai actually has a pretty high percentage of speakers, and they haven't gotten going yet in terms of programming. Crow actually has a pretty high percentage of speakers, and they haven't really gotten going too much with programming, but there's some discussion about it. So I think those languages that have a great shot if they really got going. Others, for those, Ronco here, Ron Korn has been doing tremendous work with Menominee. It started out as a solo operation, really major passion, but he's been building other people and efforts there. And there are many, many other examples too. Doing some work with Wampanoags. There's been a lot of kind of recovery work, mainly focusing on, vocabulary and grammar stuff, working off of old texts. It's a totally different game there, where it's not so much speaking to your grandma who still knows her language kind of work. But yeah, there's some really heroic efforts that are underway, and different places have different kinds of strength and tools to do the work. But those stories always give me tremendous hope. And I've seen remarkable things. Our flagship school for Ojibwe immersion, which is located in the Hayward Lakes area in northwestern Wisconsin, called Wadu Kodading. They did something that hadn't been done since World War II. Their last speakers were all born in World War II era. And today there's about 125 little kids running around hollering at each other on the playground in Ojibwe. And that's something that hadn't been happening there. I'm on the school board there, and it's really exciting to see what's going on. There are big challenges too. By the way, they're in the midst of doing a search for a new executive director. So anybody with major passion around language want a job, we're open until filled. And so, yeah, there's some pretty exciting things going on, big challenges too.
All right, cool, man. I'm sort of trying to digest all the stuff that you're saying, and there's a lot happening there. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that you had time to discuss and talk about is sort of there's a lot to changing the narrative, so to speak. I mean, there's two ways to approach or view things that are just like mind shift type dynamics. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the book was we're focusing a lot of attention, at least in the academic realm, on something we call decolonization. And in the book, in an interesting twist, you point right at it and say, when all these things start happening, when we start to revitalize our language, and that leads to cultural integrity and healthy practices in the way of food and activity and whatnot, that is, we're not necessarily going to view it as decolonized, but maybe more as liberated. And that's I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about mind shifts like that, or why is that important to say it different or to view it different?
Right. So it's true, like, throughout the whole indigenous studies field, there's a lot of talk and framing around, colonization and decolonization. And I think really one of the only major drawbacks to that frame is that our efforts and work are defined in relationship to the colonizer. And like good progress, is still like, it's like if somebody is a victim of an assault, right? There's kind of in a healing journey for that person, there's a shift that goes on from I'm defined by this experience as a victim to I'm defined by this experience as a survivor to I am beyond that experience where it's something that happened to me, but I'm defined by other things. And that's where I would like to see us go as Indigenous people. We acknowledge, and we've been through this healing process with regard to our experience and ongoing experience with ongoing colonization. But where we set our sights upon defining ourselves by our own cultural toolbox with its own merits, rather than by a colonial frame or a resistance to the colonial frame. That doesn't mean we don't resist the colonization. Learning an Indigenous language is a powerful healing and decolonizing act, but let's have a full trajectory of healing. And to me, that's going to have a more integrated, holistic, and Indigenous framed approach, rather than just something that's in relationship to our colonial experience. And honestly, I think all human beings need that. Like white folk need healing too. So many are so deeply dissatisfied with the institutionalized moral guidance, whether that's coming from a political frame or a religious frame, and are hungry to be connected to one another, other human beings, to have a sense of communalism that, frankly, for almost all of human history until 10,000 years ago, that's how we all made it, was by relying on the people next to us. And now we're so focused on individualism and competition and materialism that we are disconnected from the things that actually feed our spirit. And so if we don't just frame it in relation to the colonial frame, which is materialism and competition and, individualism, but we pick something that's has its own merits, that's going to help liberate us from the confines of that psychological violence.
Wicked, man. I like it. I believe in the book you quoted the late great George Carlin in regard to that, right? I mean, call it the American dream.
Yeah, we call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it.
Yeah. All right, man. So I know in particular that there's a group of young Menominee folks that are listening in on this, and these are young teens. I'm talking like 14 to 16 that are here as part of a Lengo. I think they're waving at you right now here as part of a they're in a Menominee youth immersion experience that we're in partnership with the college with. And I'm sure that there are other young folks. You talked about the young folks at Wadukadotting and then the 125 or so that are running around hollering at each other in Ojibwe. I wanted to open the door for you here to maybe give them some inspiration and some guidance on a journey that is respectful of our history and informed by our language and what that can look like for them.
Yeah. So for the young people who are on today's call, keep leaning in. I believe in our languages. I believe in our cultures, but I also believe in you. Our future is already in your hands, and you can do this. We are never exactly the same as the generation before us, but we are informed by the generation before us. And in spite of 500 pretty rough years, here we are. We made it. We're the ones who figured out how to cooperate, how to get food when there's, feet of snow on the ground, how to work collectively and collaboratively and communally. Our languages, our cultures, they are beautiful. They are relevant. They are the keys to knowing who we are and making it in this world. In terms of our whatever kinds of success that you may define for yourselves. I have 9 kids, and they are all so different. It's hard to believe they came out of the same place. But I believe that there are 1,000 different definitions of success, and that whatever definition they pick is awesome. And it's my job to support and help them and coach them along the way. So I got one's going to be a firefighter, I got one who wants to go into medicine. I got one, who's heading off to Dartmouth and has no idea what he wants to do with his life. I've got one who wants to be a professional fisherman. They're all very different. But to me, the things that help them be successful are being able to look in the mirror and say, I love what I see. And that's something that we don't get out there trying to be something that we're not. And so when we get to learn about our language, our history, our culture, that is really powerful medicine. So I'm proud of you guys for leaning into that. Keep going, and it'll take you somewhere great.
Waiwanan, EG. I got one more question for you here, and I see Kate's on, so let me pose my question, and then we'll start to wrap this up. But I just wanted to ask you if you have it. Obviously this book has been written and it's published, so that it's a little bit in the rearview mirror. But upon completing it and publishing it, I'd like to give you some time to reflect, make comment too, and maybe leave us with some sort of message that's important to you about Language Warriors Manifesto.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are lots of things. I'm mindful. For us, like we have at our drum ceremonies, initially, all of the men who are seated on those drums were men who had killed other people in tribal combat way back in the day. And they said, as the ceremony goes on through the years, and those people pass away, you put in anybody who's seen conflict, and eventually you'll run out of people who've had that experience. And that's good, because the way of the warrior is peace. And our societies our people will never experience peace until our warriors lead us to peace. And this is a big, big revelation for me. I'm the first generation of my family that actually did not serve in combat. All the way back. My father, after he came here at age 13, when he was 17, lied about his age, enlisted in the US Army, wanted to go kill Nazis. They sent him to the Pacific Theater. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, all the way back in like every American conflict, and then tribal wars. It was a big change. And when I think about our work with language revitalization, I use the word warrior on purpose, that it is a battle to keep our languages and cultures alive, and it's one worth fighting. But within this frame, that the way of the warrior, there are many ways to be a warrior, and that this is some of the most important work of our time. And we have a lot at stake to keep our languages and cultures alive, and the world has a lot at stake. Even in our cultural toolbox, we talk about respect all things, respect all beings, and look what's happening to the environment around us as human beings have been so reluctant to do that. Look what's happening to our racial and political climate as people are so resistant to that. And there's so much deep messaging embedded in our languages. And, happy to field some questions on those. I see them popping up in the chat here. But ultimately, we all have a part to play, and we can all contribute. If you're didn't grow up a fluent speaker, that's through no fault of your own. And I think we need to move past the blaming whoever didn't teach and blaming whoever's not trying to learn, and get to the point where we just take responsibility and make and be the change that we want to see in this world. And ultimately, that's what's going to carry us forward.
Chi miigwech niji. Wow, I appreciate it, man. Waiwanan, Kitana, and Wagush. That concludes my portion of questioning. Kate, I know you've been paying attention to the chat. You want to go ahead and start to wind this down?
Great, thank you. Wow. Ron and Anton, this has just been remarkable. I do have a couple of, one comment that I want to bring forward and two questions from my friend Gard here. He said that at the 2009 Parliament of the World's Religions in Sydney, that Indigenous leaders from across the planet shared this sort of saying, when you're ready to listen, we have answers to our problems. And I just wanted to share that with you. I've heard that before as well, and I hope we start learning to listen. One of his questions is, can you speak to Indigenous practices of restorative justice, which is obviously a gift to our modern world?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we should all take, all those people we want to give a good talking to and give them a good listening to. I'll give you an example, because yes, restorative justice practices and just totally different ways of doing things. So because the Hawaiians are great pioneers in Indigenous language revitalization, I've been, to the Big Island many times, and very interested in the work that they're doing on multiple levels. And for starters, they'll do something like this. All of their immersion schools at the start of school every day, they'll have every person who works there, every cook, janitor, teacher, administrator lined up outside the school before the kids even come. And then here come the kids' buses, straggling parents, and then the kids line up and the kids have to sing, asking for permission to come in the school in the Polynesian tradition. And then when the staff feels they're sincere, they sing back. And then every kid gets a hug from everybody who works there at the start of every single day. Aloha, which means hello, goodbye, and I love you. And, in the mainstream, people would be saying, are you serious? 45 minutes on cultural enrichment every day? Our kids are awake in the morning, make them do math. Until you realize that those schools don't have a significant truancy problem. And you don't have to teach everything twice or twice as slow. And when they matriculate a kid, they don't say we're matriculating a kid, we're matriculating a whole family. And so they assemble all the families and they all go pick medicines, and together they weave a lei that goes over the door to the school. And then they have an exchange of promises between the teachers and the kids. And the parents have to say, we are entrusting to you our most sacred human, our child, and we're asking you to accept them into your ohana, your family, and asking you to treat them as a member of your ohana. And the school responds back, we are humbled that you would think us worthy to receive your child. We will love your child as a member of our ohana. And they have this exchange of promises back and forth. It's really quite powerful and moving. And then this all sets up the template for like the restorative justice practices. So if something goes sideways, and sometimes it does, let's say Joey hits Johnny, then you might have heard of like Lomi Lomi massage. It's kind of like work the bad stuff out. They will actually assemble the whole school. And if there's something that happened wrong, someone will Lomi, they'll talk about it. But whoever Lomis, it's like in the mainstream, you would think, what, you want to shame my kid? But there, when someone Lomis, they get a hug from everybody in the whole school. And it rehabilitates the relationship between aggrieved parties rather than assigns punishment or, puts somebody on a suspension and removes them from the community for a time or things like that. And so they have a range of practices. But I think it's built right in with the language, and it's built right in with the cultural practices. And when you center those, they really have very few discipline issues.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I'm going to get back to Gard's second question if we have time, but someone else put it in. I'm sorry, I didn't write down who it was. Does a language warrior have to be fluent in the language? Thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Ultimately, Daryl Kipp was great on this. He was one of the pioneers of the Blackfeet revitalization efforts. And they really started with him as a second language learner. He was not a fluent speaker, one kid and one grandma. And that's what they started with, you know, and his leadership was instrumental in making, you know, the Paigon Institute possible. And today that, you know, it's really a very successful model on language revitalization. I think, you know, one of my namesakes told me, she said, if you ever learn something, make sure you teach at least 4 other people. If you learn one of our medicines, if you learn a song, if you learn a word, teach at least 4 people. Ultimately, we all have something to teach. And we all also have something to learn. And when we are open both ways to learning and teaching, you know, that flow of energy is really positive for healing and for the instruction and revitalization of whatever we care about.
Wonderful. Okay, one last one, and then we'll probably have to wrap this up. In Africa, there's a term Ubuntu, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, which is shared in different indigenous cultures in Africa with different ways of expressing it in those languages. Its meaning is incredibly profound. I am because we are because I am. Is there something similar in Ojibwe and other Native American indigenous languages? And are there other universal terms that you have experienced which are gifts to humanity?
Yes, parallel. Like in Ojibwe, even when we're saying goodbye, we'll say Gikawabam and Minawa. It's never a goodbye. It's I'll see you again, this world or the next. It's kind of an affirmation of the spiritual being of anybody that you're running into. And, you know, similar to Ubuntu, that we're all connected and that I am because we are, both ways. I think it reflects this sense of community and affinity that we share as human beings.
Thank you so much. I'm going to save the chat for you, Anton, because there's a couple of comments that you may have missed that might be something you'd want to know. There's someone here that's met you before and wants to make sure that.
Yes, you know, there's no way to exhaust a conversation like this. So at the top of the chat, someone dropped in my website. It's got my email address, all that stuff. So I'm happy to stay in conversation with anyone. There are lists of resources on language revitalization there. There's, of course, the book, which we'll shamelessly plug, but happy to stay in conversation with all of you.
Thank you. This has just been an incredible conversation. I appreciate your time, both Anton and Ron. Miigwech, and have a wonderful day, rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Miigwech, Wawanan.
Aha, Gikawabam.
Ikawabmin Niji.
Out.
Thanks, kids, for being here.